F1 teams just uncovered a hidden FIA rule, and it could wipe out Mercedes' engine advantage overnight. We're talking about a loophole worth up to 0.4 per lap, a system so powerful it helped Mercedes dominate the first races and build a lead of over 40 points before anyone could react. But here's what makes this insane. The rule was always there. Mercedes didn't break it. They built their entire engine around the one condition the FIA forgot to define. And now, that condition has finally been exposed. Because the moment the FIA enforces the rule under real racing temperatures, Mercedes doesn't just lose speed. They lose the foundation of their performance. Which means the team that looked unbeatable just weeks ago could suddenly be fighting to survive. And here's the twist that changes everything. They already used it. They already won with it. They already built the gap. So now the real question is not what Mercedes is about to lose. It's whether what they gained before anyone noticed is already enough to win the championship. At first, no one thought this rule mattered. It was just one line, buried deep inside the technical regulations. A simple limit. 16-1. Clear. Defined. Or at least, that's how it looked. Because in Formula 1, rules are never just about what they say. They're about what they don't say. And this one had a gap. A critical one. Because the FIA defined the compression limit, but never defined the conditions where that limit had to be respected. No temperature. No real operating scenario. Just a number. And for most teams, that was enough. They built engines that stayed within that limit. At all times. In all conditions. Safe. Predictable. Compliant. But Mercedes didn't follow that approach. They asked a different question. What happens when the engine is no longer in those controlled conditions? Because an engine doesn't race in a laboratory. It races under extreme heat. Extreme pressure. Extreme stress. And under those conditions, everything changes. Materials expand. Volumes shift. Behavior transforms. And that's where Mercedes found their advantage. Not by breaking the rule, but by building around its weakest point. Inside the engine, they created something almost invisible. A micro-chamber. Just a few cubic centimeters. So small, it looked irrelevant. But it wasn't. Because during FIA inspections, at lower temperatures, that chamber is active. Its volume is included. The engine sits perfectly at the legal limit. 16-1. No issues. No suspicion. But once the car hits the track, once temperatures rise into real racing conditions, that same system behaves differently. The micro-chamber effectively disappears from the equation. And suddenly, the compression increases. Beyond the limit. Up to 18-1 in real conditions. And that difference changes everything. More efficient combustion. More power. More performance on every straight. Every lap. Every race. Up to 3 or 0.4 per lap from a single idea. And the most dangerous part? It was completely legal. Because the FIA wasn't measuring the engine where it actually performs. Only where it's easiest to control. And that created two realities. One for inspection. One for racing. And as long as those two realities stayed separate, Mercedes had the perfect advantage. Which explains what happened next. The start of the season. Dominance. Controlled. Consistent. Wins. Podiums. A lead that quickly stretched beyond 40 points while rivals were still trying to understand what they were seeing. But in Formula 1, patterns don't go unnoticed. Engineers started comparing data. Looking deeper. And eventually, they found it. Not a component. Not a visible trick. A behavior. An engine that performed differently depending on the conditions. And that's when everything changed. Because now, the question wasn't how Mercedes was faster. It was why the rule allowed it. And once that question reached the FIA, the entire situation became unstable. And the moment that question reached the FIA, everything shifted. Because now, this wasn't about one team being clever. It was about whether the rule itself was failing. At first, the FIA stood firm. The engine had been tested, validated, approved. Everything was legal. End of story. But the problem didn't disappear. Because the data kept telling a different truth. On track, Mercedes was gaining performance in conditions the rule was supposed to control. And that contradiction became impossible to ignore. So the FIA changed its perspective. They stopped asking if the engine passed the test, and started asking if the test reflected reality. Because if you measure something in conditions that don't exist during a race, you're not regulating performance. You're regulating an illusion. And Mercedes had built their entire advantage inside that illusion. So the FIA went back to the rule, not to rewrite it, but to complete it, to add the missing condition. Temperature. Real operating conditions. the environment where the engine actually works. And with that single change, everything collapses. Because now, the engine must comply not just in controlled checks, but in real racing conditions. And in those conditions, the numbers no longer match. The compression rises above the limit. The system no longer fits inside the regulation. And just like that, what was once perfectly legal becomes unusable instantly. And this is where the shock hits Mercedes. Because this isn't a small loss. It's not a minor adjustment. It's the removal of the core concept behind their engine. The very thing that made their performance possible. Without it, the entire car changes. The power delivery, the efficiency, the balance, everything shifts. Drivers feel it immediately. Confidence drops, and lap times follow. But here's where the tension becomes even greater. Because this change didn't happen at the beginning. It happened after Mercedes had already used the advantage. After the wins. After the points. After building a gap that still exists. And that creates a situation no one in Formula One can ignore. The advantage is gone. But the damage is done. And now, the championship is split in two. Before the rule was fully enforced. And after. Because before, Mercedes was untouchable. Now, they are exposed. And every team on the grid knows it. Ferrari sees a real fight. Red Bull sees an opportunity. Every rival understands the same thing. The advantage is over. And when that happens, everything accelerates. Because no one waits. No one hesitates. They push harder. They upgrade faster. They attack every weakness. And Mercedes is no longer controlling the race. They are reacting to it. And in Formula One, that is the moment where dominance begins to disappear. And this is where the real collapse begins. Not because Mercedes suddenly forgot how to build a fast car, but because they lost the one thing that made everything easier. The margin. At the start of the season, they had space. Space to push. Space to make small mistakes. Space to control races without ever reaching the limit. But now, that space is gone. And without it, everything becomes harder. Because when you don't have a performance cushion, you feel every weakness. Every corner that doesn't work perfectly. Every straight where the power is no longer enough. Every lap where the car demands more precision than before. And that changes how you drive. Drivers stop attacking freely. They start managing, protecting, thinking twice before every move. And that hesitation costs time. Tiny amounts at first. But in Formula One, tiny becomes critical. Because while Mercedes is losing that freedom, their rivals are gaining it. Ferrari starts pushing harder. Red Bull becomes more aggressive. Every team senses the same thing. This is the moment. The moment where the gap is no longer protected. And once that belief spreads, it changes the entire grid. Because confidence creates speed. And right now, confidence is shifting away from Mercedes. And toward everyone else. Which leads to something even more dangerous. Momentum. Because performance doesn't just change. It builds. Race after race. Session after session. Until the difference is no longer theoretical. It's visible. A closer qualifying. A tighter race. A position lost that would have been secure before. And those moments? They accumulate. Until one day, the team that was leading comfortably is no longer leading at all. But here's the deeper problem Mercedes faces. They can't fix this with a simple upgrade. They can't just add back what they lost. Because the advantage wasn't a part. It was a concept. A way of interpreting the rules. And that concept is gone. Closed permanently. Which means the only way forward is to rebuild. To find performance somewhere else. In areas that were never the priority before. And that takes time. Time they don't have. Because every race now is another opportunity for rivals to close the gap. Another chance for the pressure to increase. Another step toward losing control completely. And that's what makes this moment so critical. Because Mercedes is no longer racing from a position of strength. They are racing from a position of defense. Trying to protect what they built early. While everything around them accelerates. And in Formula One, that's the most dangerous place to be. Because once you stop leading the race, you start reacting to it. And once you're reacting, you're already one step behind. Which brings everything to the edge. Because now, it's no longer about maintaining dominance. It's about surviving long enough before the rest of the grid finally catches them. And now, everything comes down to the final phase. Because there's a moment in every championship where the past stops protecting you. And the present decides everything. Mercedes is entering that moment. They still have the points. They still have the lead. They still have the results from those first races when the advantage was at its peak. But on track, that advantage no longer exists. And that creates the most dangerous scenario in Formula One. A team that is leading, without being the fastest. Because now, every race becomes a calculation. How much can they defend? How much are they losing? How long can the early gap hold? And the answers are changing fast. Because while Mercedes is trying to stabilize, everyone else is accelerating. Ferrari is no longer guessing. They know the gap is gone. Red Bull is no longer chasing perfection. They just need execution. And that shift turns pressure into momentum. Because now, every race weekend starts the same way. Not with Mercedes controlling the pace, but with rivals attacking it. More aggressive strategies. More risks in qualifying. More confidence in wheel-to-wheel battles. And that pressure doesn't go away. It builds. Lap after lap. Race after race. Until it reaches a point where one mistake changes everything. And that's the real danger. Because Mercedes no longer has the margin to absorb errors. A slow pit stop. A missed setup. A slightly wrong strategy call. Before, those things didn't matter. Now, they cost positions. And eventually, they cost championships. But here's the final twist. The one detail that defines this entire story. Mercedes doesn't need to dominate anymore. They just need to hold on. Because those early races, those wins, that advantage built before the rule was fully enforced, still exists. Every point, every result, still counting. And that creates a fragile balance. They are ahead, but vulnerable. Leading, but under constant attack. And the championship now lives in that tension. Between what they already secured, and what they are about to lose. So in the end, this was never just about a rule, or an engine, or even a loophole. It was about timing. Mercedes didn't just build a faster car. They built their advantage at the perfect moment. Before the system could react. Before the FIA could close the gap. Before anyone else understood what was happening. And they used that moment perfectly. But now, that moment is over. The rule is complete. The advantage is gone. And only one question remains. When the season reaches its final race, will that early dominance be enough to survive everything that came after?